Good morning, everyone. I am Pam Marsh, the chair of the Task Force on Cannabis, Derived Intoxicants, and Illegal Cannabis Production, aka the House Bill 3000 Task Force. Welcome to our second meeting, and we will start with calling the roll. Amanda, are you helping us with that?
Yes, I'm more than happy to.
Thank you.
Senator Przansky.
Here by video, team video.
Senator Hansel.
Senator Hansel here by video, if I can get on.
Great. Representative.
No, I see it.
All right. Representative Morgan.
Present.
By video.
Rob Bovett. He did say he might be a little bit late.
Okay.
He had another task force.
Use him and wait for his arrival.
All right. Scott Winkles.
Present and participating by video.
Sheriff Stickler.
Here and participating by video.
Courtney Moran. Matt Cyrus. Jay Noller.
Present by video.
Amanda Metzler.
Present by video.
Brent Kenyon.
Here by audio. Right.
Lauren Henderson.
Here by audio.
Andre Urso.
Present by video.
Steve Marks.
Present by video.
Josh Eastman.
Present by video.
Amanda Krause.
Here by video.
Jake Johnstone.
Present by video.
Amanda, I didn't even hear the name you said because of other people's background noise, since other people haven't muted.
Okay, I'll go ahead and just mute all really quick. All right, Amanda Swanson.
Present by video.
Tyler Bechtel.
Present by video.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. We have a good representation of our presence here today. I want to note that since our last meeting, the first meeting, a couple of you have gotten your permanent assignments to this committee. Several others of you are still waiting for all the paperwork to go through. We are glad to have you here, and I think it's a group that really represents the variety of stakeholders that have something to say about the production of illegal products within our community. So thank you all for being here. The first item of business on our agenda today is to review the rules. You will remember at our first meeting, we had a set of draft rules. There were a number of changes that were recommended, and Amanda took those back, incorporated the changes, and we want to review those and hopefully vote to approve them at this point. Amanda, can you describe to us the changes that you made since the last meeting?
Yes, I can. The first change I made was adding in the Robert's Rules of Order. And then the other change was the addition that people can send a proxy to the meeting if they're not able to attend, but that proxy cannot vote. Great.
Has everybody had a chance to review those rules? Do you have any additional questions about them? We'll open the floor. I'm going to try and be scanning during our whole meeting for people who put their hands up, but if I miss you, please don't hesitate to just jump in. Anybody have a comment on the rules?
I'm trying to pull them up, honestly. Sorry, I'm looking for, we got so many emails all at once. I'm trying to find which one is the right one for today.
If you look at the last one that Amanda sent to us midweek, it has 3 attachments and it's one of the attachments.
Amanda, do you have those on your screen? Could you throw them up for everyone to take a quick look at? That might be the most efficient way here. Oops, you're muted.
I'll pull it up right now.
Great, thank you. Okay, and you can see the changes that were made again at the top, just below the purpose statement. The Robert's Rules of Orders has been injected there, and then number 9 references the proxies and the role of proxies. Okay, I don't see any comments. So Amanda, we can let that down, and if you would call the roll. The motion is to approve the rules for establishment of this committee.
Okay.
So moved.
Senator Przansky,
Aye.
Senator Hansel,
Aye.
Representative Marsh,
Marsh votes aye.
Representative Morgan,
Aye.
Rob Bovet, I'm not sure. Okay. Scott Winkles,
Aye.
Sheriff Sickler,
Aye.
Jay Noller,
Aye.
Amanda Metzler,
Aye.
Brent Kenyon,
Aye.
Lauren Henderson,
Aye.
Andre Urso,
Aye.
Steve Marks,
Aye.
Josh Eastman,
Aye.
Amanda Kraus,
Aye.
Jake Johnstone,
Aye.
Amanda Swanson,
Amanda, could you call that name again?
yep, Amanda Swanson,
Aye.
and Tyler Bechtel.
Aye.
Great. So the rules are approved and we are officially sanctioned. So thank you all for that. And thank you for the comments that were made in our first meeting. I think those are good improvements. Senator Hansel, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Chair Marsh. I just want to say, for some reason, my video isn't working, but I hear everybody and I see everybody. And so I'll probably be participating by audio.
Super. We are very glad to have you here. We missed you at our first meeting, but knew you were off having good adventures. So with that, colleagues, I want to turn to some of the work that was done in the interim since our last meeting. You will remember that I volunteered to work with staff and Vice Chair Morgan to try to put some parameters around the work that we want to put together out of this, that we want to produce out of this committee. And we volunteered as part of that to look at a subcommittee structure. So we went through the variety of assignments that this committee has as a result of both House Bill 3000 and Senate Bill 1564. And we sent out a memo subsequently that suggests how we organize to do this work. And I'm just going to quickly go through that, get any feedback. I did not receive any emails from any of you objecting to anything that we were proposing, but there is still time to do that here today. And then if we are moving forward with the structure as proposed, we'll talk about the subcommittees and your opportunity to volunteer for any or all of those subcommittees. Steve, I see your hand up. Steve Marks.
Amanda, can you mute out again? I'm getting residual noise from someone's mic and then come back in. That'd be great.
Yep, no problem. I'll mute everybody right now. Okay.
Okay. So thank you, Amanda. So we want to, if I can refer you again to the memo that we sent out in the interim, what we suggest is that a few topics be reserved for discussion, at least initially, by the full committee. These seem to be topics that we think that need the benefit of the whole committee and that can be reasonably negotiated with all of us at the same table. Those include the need for ongoing funding for the work around illegal operations, the consolidation of administrative functions that are related to the regulation of cannabis, and changes to state law or agency practice that we may need to make in order to address labor trafficking. Those are all big issues, but we felt like they were best addressed with the committee as a whole. And we'll just, if that's agreeable to all of you, we'll just start picking those issues off as we set the agendas for subsequent meetings. We also proposed 3 subcommittees. And those subcommittees would be, first one addressing the issue broadly described as cannabinoids. Representative Morgan, Vice Chair Morgan, has agreed to convene that committee. You will see the bulleted items beneath it, including changes to state laws to support the regulation of intoxicating cannabis-derived products and artificially derived cannabinoids, and methods to prevent sales to minors of industrial hemp commodities or products that contain intoxicating cannabinoids. And the third bullet is testing requirements, addressing testing requirements. So that's all in the bucket to be addressed by subcommittee number 1. The second subcommittee, number 2, generally we described as law enforcement issues, and we are hoping Senator Przansky will convene that group. The items that were officially assigned to us in that bucket include any changes to state law relating to the processing of search warrants in order to increase efficiency in investigating illegal operations, and other issues relating to law enforcement or prosecution. So they're pretty broadly described, but there's some specificity around the search warrant assignment. And then the third subcommittee, Water and Natural Resources. In your absence, Senator Hansel, we hope that you might convene this, although I'm your backup plan. That group is intended to address any changes to state law to address water theft, unauthorized use of water, other environmental considerations, potentially including the use of pesticides, water contamination, and site cleanup, which we understand is a significant issue, and regulation to address genetic engineering of cannabis. So I want to open it up at this point to just first any general comments or feedback, suggestions regarding the organizational structure that we've suggested. And Senator Hansel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really want to be on Lily's committee.
Sure. Well, I failed to say that you can be on any committees that you want. That's the next discussion, actually, after we affirm what the structure is to pitch all of you in signing up for any of these committees. We were very clear in our last meeting that we knew that there were both intersecting topics and intersecting passions, and we wanted people to be able to sign up for any committee they want to participate in.
I want to be her vice chair, so I didn't have to be a chair. I'll be more specific.
You and I will have that conversation later. That sounds like we should take that offline. We can do that if that's your preference, for sure. Jake.
Yeah, I just had a question about the last part of the third committee, natural resources. I believe you said genetic engineering of cannabis. I know nothing about that. However, everything else in that committee makes sense for me. Would that genetic engineering component be better suited in the first committee? That sounds like it would be dealing with more of the cannabinoids and science and testing. I'm just asking for clarifying.
Jake, I asked exactly the same question when it was proposed to me, and I'm going to let Amanda or one of her colleagues share the logic of that.
And I think Sunny may be on the line and she may be able to better describe, but I think that Department of Agriculture was hoping it could be with the Natural Resources and Water group.
Yeah, this is Sunny Summers with the Oregon Department of Ag. Now that you mention it that way, Jake, I think it could go either way. So it's a hard one to slot well. So yeah.
Okay, so more discussion to come on the genetic engineering issue. But I agree with you, Jake. That was my first instinct as well. Vice Chair Morgan.
Thank you, Chair Marsh. Is it the law enforcement group? So last year when House Bill 3000 was implemented, there was Operation Table Rock and kind of ongoing issues related to enforcement that are not just law enforcement, but agency enforcement. Where would that fall under?
Specifically, what we were doing in this subcommittees was really to assign the very specific things that were listed in the bills to make sure that they had a home. I think there are a lot of other topics like that one, Rep. Morgan, that could be discussed by the committee as a whole as well. We just wanted to make sure that we assigned everything that we knew needed to be discussed.
Got it. And just follow up on the genetic question, if possible.
Sure.
I guess I didn't hear ODA's response in what the genetic modification we were going to be discussing. I remember conversation about when you have male and female plants and you cross-pollinate and you ruin somebody's, harvest or something like that. But genetically modifying are we genetically modifying the seeds to grow a different plant or a variation, or are we genetically modifying like Delta 8 THC and creating an intoxicant off of a non-intoxicant? So I guess I was trying to remember and I couldn't remember, and I didn't hear clarification on what that topic was supposed to be, so we can maybe better determine which subcommittee it goes under.
Sure. Sunny, do you want to provide a little bit more context?
Sure.
Thank you, Rep. Morgan and Rep. Marsh. Lauren, it sounds like Lauren would like to jump in, so I will let him jump in first.
Yeah, thank you, Sunny, for hearing me. Chair Marsh, Vice Chair Morgan. I'm on the road. I have an elderly mom that got COVID, so I'm on my way to go see her. So I apologize. I can't make my. However, I think Rep. Morgan, you described, I think, it perfectly. We deal with coexistence issues all the time in Oregon around the pollination issues, neighbor to neighbor issues. That is not a new thing in Oregon. And so if that's what we're talking about here, that's not just a cannabis thing. If you all remember canola and that the legislature chose to limit canola, it was for some of those same purposes. So I would recommend it's probably not maybe that as much as it is the latter, which was the science that goes about creating all of the things that we're having a hard time keeping up with, and the creative science that goes with that, and then how that relates to the intoxicating pieces and how that's regulated, managed, all of those kinds of things. But I will leave that to the group.
So Rep. Morgan, a question to you. Having heard that description, do you feel like that fits into your assignment with the cannabinoid subcommittee?
I honestly didn't hear clarification. I heard him identify two things and ask a question of which one did we intend. So I would say the coexistence needs to go in natural resources. The genetically modifying for getting a different product needs to go under the first subcommittee and take on both topics individually in the two. But if somebody else remembers correctly what we intended by genetically modified, identifying the two things we've said, I think they're both appropriate to talk about, one in each committee. But if there was something else we're missing, I'm just not remembering, and I'm looking for someone else who remembers better than I do. I just got back into town after midnight. I'm a little jet lagged, sorry.
Senator Prozanski?
Yeah, so Rep. Morgan, I remember it kind of as you're saying. To me, I thought that this was basically making Delta 8 in the sense of getting into modifying something that was not intoxicating into something that would be, as compared to the genetic engineering of seeds. I think that the seed issue is something that we should potentially look at, but I don't know if it really falls under this task force as compared to having it into an ag review That's my take on it.
Thank you. Steve Marks.
I was going to take down my hand. I think Floyd got it right. I mean, I do think you got the division right. There's really the grow issues on cross-pollination and sort of what happens as management out on the landscape and ground. And then there's the genetic issues about D8, but there's genetic issues about the plant, the seed, the kind of clones, the new potencies, you know, the way they're doing biologics that grow up to be marijuana plants. So I think there is maybe a piece in that we're concerned about in the cannabinoids group with that, but I think, you know, primarily, you know, if you're talking about the management issues on the landscape between the conflicts out there, that feels like natural resources to me. The other issues feel like they belong in the cannabinoids group.
Sunny, your hand was up. Did you want to add anything to that?
Sure. I was just going to share, and I apologize, my Teams is not working well this morning either, so I'm through the browser and no video. But I wanted to share with the full task force, ODA has authority through our plant pest and disease program to do volunteer cannabis rules, and we started those last year, and so I think they're very close to being ready to put out for public comment. It doesn't address cross-pollination, which traditionally the legislature has chose to not address in Oregon because we have a lot of crops that deal with cross-pollination and coexistence issues when we grow some 200 plus crops in the state. However, having a potential vector site for any pest or disease, that is something that ODA can regulate. And so, for example, if somebody were to leave plants in the field and just walk away, or have crops that overseed or overwinter and are escaping from the property, that's what those volunteer cannabis rules will be looking to address. So we will be doing rulemaking on that this summer. So I just wanted to, I think I shared it when we met as a smaller group to kind of set up these subcommittees, but I wanted to make sure that folks were aware of that in the broader task force.
So it seems like that question and maybe reviewing the rules around volunteer plants would be appropriate for the Natural Resources Subcommittee. The question of genetic modification of product, then Rep. Morgan, seems like it's going to your committee. Great. Good distinction. Any other comments on the subcommittee structure? So if not, I want to really encourage you to sign up. You can communicate with Amanda if you would like to be on one or more of these committees. I think we've already gotten a good, at least initial response, and at least the law enforcement committee may actually have already reached out to members to get things going. But let us know any of the committees that you'd like to be on. Scott.
Thank you, Representative Marsh. I'd like to, if it's allowable, our water lobbyist is not a member of the committee. I would like him to participate in the water conversation, if that's, or would it need to be, do the bylaws require that it be the appointed member?
I have assumed that the committees would bring in experts as needed.
Okay.
I don't think it's specifically addressed within the rules. Rep. Morgan.
Thanks, Chair Marsh. I think that does bring up an interesting question. If a different division had a delegate, or what we would call a proxy for the subcommittee, based on different expertise, would they be, does the subcommittees have a vote, or is it just giving feedback and consensus? And then the only voting happens in the full committee. I don't think we addressed it in the rules, and I don't know if we need to revisit that just for technicality. But generally, I know that in the legislature, when we have a subcommittee, we can bring in other people to help us get it through. So going back to the last topic, I just want to make sure the cross-pollination does stay in the Natural Resources Committee. I think that is a topic that should still be addressed. It is something that we've heard of here, and there was a little bit of discussion. So I didn't catch, was that even with the rules that ODA is doing, I think it's still appropriate to have that conversation as we have 3 different branches of enforcement in the state and different things going on, and they're not working together in the silos right now. So this is an area that could potentially miss the mark because there's no place to address it between multiple branches. You might have a OLCC licensed farm next to a ODA licensed farm, and they're not regulating the other. And there's not any conversations between the agencies of how they're regulating the other, or rather intercepting. So it's not just an ODA function because they're not overseeing all licensees that grow. And quite frankly, the recreational OLCC licenses are the ones most at risk because they're the ones that are allowed to grow the high THC. And if they lose that potency, there's no money there in that process, so they lose that harvest. So well, granted, the ODA licenses, if they get a high THC back into theirs, they could lose their harvest as well. But anyhow, I just want to make sure it stays on the list.
I think good point, Rep. Morgan. And my intention for that committee would be they start with the rules and then discuss whether or not there are additional actions that need to be considered there. Okay, so Amanda Metzler.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate what Lily was saying on the cross-pollination issue needing to stay in natural resources. Why the rules that ODA is addressing, they're addressing plants that are already existing with not addressing how they got there as the volunteers. And that's because of cross-pollination or for males being left in the field. So I think it's an important topic and it's not addressed in those ODA rules that they're going to be making.
Great. Okay, please sign up for subcommittees. Our hope is to do a lot. These are pretty substantial conversations that are going to take place in the subcommittees, and we really need the right brains around the table. So if that's yours, we want you to be there. And with that, unless there's any other comments on the subcommittees or anybody who wants to quickly take this opportunity to volunteer, feel free, or email Amanda. We will move on to the next item on the agenda, and that is an update from the Criminal Justice Commission. Some of you may have watched a hearing that was held during legislative days in the Senate, Senator Taylor's committee, and there were questions raised about what was going on with the allocation of the current grant cycle. We thought this was a great opportunity to invite the Ken, Ken, you're going to have to help me with the pronunciation of your last name because I blow it every time. Ken in from the CJC to really give us an overview of the program he is running, the grant program he's been running for a while, and then to give us a very specific update on what's happening with the current grant cycle. So Ken, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Chair Morgan, Co-Chair Marsh. I appreciate you having me here today. And my name is Ken Santchagrin. I am the Executive Director of the Criminal Justice Commission. I do have an intimidating last name to pronounce. I do want to apologize right before I begin. I'm going to start sharing my screen, and while that's coming up, I had COVID a couple weeks ago. I'm all better, luckily not infecting anybody, but I have a lingering cough, and so if I mute real quickly, it's just to mainly save your ears from me coughing in your ears. I apologize about that. But let's see if I can get my 10 slides up, and I'd be happy to take questions as they arise or at the end, whatever you would like, Chair Marsh.
I think, Ken, we'll wait till you finish your whole presentation just to give you a chance to get through it.
Great. And hopefully this screen should show up for you all shortly.
Yep, we've got it.
All right. So just have a few slides here today. A number of these items were passed on to me for things to cover, so some I'll cover in brief and then a couple in more detail. But the grant that we're talking about here this afternoon is the Illegal Marijuana Market Enforcement Grant Program. And the grant program itself, it really flowed out of the issues that remained in the marijuana cultivation, following Measure 91. We don't have to really go into that background. We wouldn't all be here today if there were not these issues that still presented themselves. But the marijuana grant program that we run at the CJC was primarily created due to the continuing scope of illegal marijuana cultivation occurring across the state, but also the complexity that these types of marijuana grows pose to law enforcement as they try to interdict against them, and then also flowing through into the prosecution of individuals who are engaging in these illegal grows. So Senate Bill 1544 in 2018 established the Illegal Marijuana Market Enforcement Grant Program, and it was established as a program to provide funding to cities and counties to support law enforcement with this illegal marijuana interdiction, but then also with a focus on prosecution as well. It was only funded at $3 million back in 2018, and we've had an average of 3 to 4 grantees through the life cycle of this grant due to that smaller amount of funding. Now, that doesn't mean that within a county, it usually only goes to one law enforcement agency. We oftentimes see law enforcement agencies partnering within that county, within each county. And so it goes to a number of agencies beyond just our 3 to 4 average grantees, but it's because they're working together. This program has gone through some pretty substantial changes over the years, especially in the past 2 years. So we had our little $3 million grant for the first couple of years, but then in 2021, HB 3000, one of the items that was included in that bill was an increase in the funding available for our grantees in this program from $3 million to $6 million. And that $6 million, like the smaller amount that came before it, it comes out of the Marijuana Taxation Administrative Fund. And so that money comes to us directly from marijuana sales, and then we are able to send it out to counties from there. At the end of the year, during the second special session, Senate Bill 893 was passed. And it did two things for our program. First, it infused an additional $20 million of one-time general fund into the program, but it also expanded our program priorities, which I'm going to go over on the next slide, to include worker abuse and/or trafficking that is occurring at these marijuana grows. And it did that by requiring, at least at this point, and we'll talk about why I have to kind of bifurcate this discussion, but it required at that point our law enforcement or local government grantees to partner with local community-based organizations to address this new program priority. Then in the short session, just a few months later, House Bill 4074 was passed, and that did an additional 2 things. First, it provided $6 million in one-time general fund dollars for these community-based organizations, and that was parceled off only for CBOs. But then it also added community-based organizations as a separate eligible grantee. So no longer were CBOs required to partner with a local government entity that would pass money through to them. They could actually apply to this grant program on their own. And then they also had this dedicated $6 million in funding for them to pursue. So within this grant program, we have a number of priorities that have been identified legislatively, both in 2018 when the program was originally created, but then also as we've made reforms in the past 2 years. But then we also have some priorities that are based in rule that have been passed by my commission as we've gone through the grant process. So the legislatively identified priorities for funding is that we should be focusing our funding on rural areas. We defined rural areas in rule, but at least in the legislation, it was left open. We should be looking for large-scale grow operations run by organized crime, and we should be looking to prevent the diversion of marijuana outside of our borders of our state here. The new priority that was added again in Senate Bill 893 at the end of last year was a priority to focus on the ongoing humanitarian crisis involved in illegal marijuana cultivation. In addition to that, we passed some priorities at the commission. The first 4 priorities that you'll see in this box were passed back in 2018 following the original creation of the program, and that's to focus on training and technical assistance for our illegal marijuana grantees. We also want to ensure that due to the complexity of these cases, that we're focusing on cases that require complex financial accounting, and then also that we can give priority to grantees that work and partner with other organizations. That's why we see a lot of these partnerships between local entities, police and sheriff's offices, for example, and grantees have to be able to track outcomes. But then the new priority that was added in response to 893 in rule was that we must provide trauma-informed and culturally, linguistically specific responsive services as we respond to the humanitarian crisis. So in this new, what we're calling the 2022 grant award cycle, I have a little bit of background here about this, but maybe I'll back up just for a moment. So following the passage of HB 3000 and following the last long session, we normally work to get our grant funding, especially for this grant, out the door rather quickly. And so we held a solicitation process immediately following the closure of 2021 long session. And we were able to make grant awards to 4 grantees during that cycle. And they are listed as our existing grantees here on this slide. So we have our Jackson County consortium, Josephine County, a consortium of Polk and Yamhill County, and then Deschutes County as well. We then, following all of this legislation that happened in 2021 and 2022, opened up an additional grant cycle during this year. And so that is the cycle that I have all the information on for you today. During that cycle, we opened our grant applications on April 20. The grant applications were due on May 18th, and we received 12 applications in total, 10 from law enforcement, and then 2 applications from community-based organizations. However, one of the applications for a community-based organization was actually a consortia of community-based organizations that were elected to work together. And as you can see by the funding that we have on this table here, the grant requests that we had for law enforcement far exceeded the amount that we have to award by around $12 million. And so we've been working ever since to make sure that we come up with a plan that will meet all of those program priorities and equitably distribute the money as well as we can. So here's a timeline of the work that we have been doing. Much of the work that we've been doing really began in earnest following the passage of 4074 during the most recent short session, and then especially once it was signed into law. We had hoped to be able to move faster on the money that was awarded to us by 893 in December. However, once the legislation began during short session and there were proposed changes to grantee eligibility, we were cautioned by the Department of Justice that if we began to move forward with the grant program, and especially if we were in the middle of contracting or making awards and eligibility requirements were changed statutorily, then we would have to start over anyway. And so what we have done is, since the passage of 4074 and since it was signed into law by the governor, we have embarked on a very accelerated grantee timeline to make sure that we get this funding out the door. We made some grant decisions at the end of May at our most recent commission meeting. At that meeting, we were able to approve all of our community-based organization funding, and we're currently in the contracting process with those grantees. And recommendations were put forward to the commission at that time for a distribution of law enforcement funding. However, our commission elected to take a little bit of additional time to ensure that, as I said, the cuts that we're proposing are ones that fit our priorities, both for the state and within the grant, as best as possible. And we intend to make law enforcement awards next Wednesday at 1 o'clock at our June commission meeting. So the 2 grantees, or the 2 applicants that we made decisions to for community-based organizations, the first is a much smaller award of almost $400,000 to the Central Oregon Illegal Marijuana Humanitarian Crisis Response applicant, who is JBARJ Youth Services. Their plan is to, within Deschutes, Jefferson, and Crook counties, to provide services to folks That's including trained interpreters, case management support services, and necessities for individuals who are survivors of human trafficking. Our other grantee will be the Cannabis Worker Resilience Partnership. It's a consortium of CBOs led by the Willamette Valley Law Project that seeks to provide statewide, multifaceted, culturally responsive direct aid to workers, collaborate with law enforcement, and provide community education to prevent exploitation. And as I mentioned, those services should be available statewide, and $5.6 million in funding was awarded to this grantee. As I've mentioned a couple times, our law enforcement funding, it's been a little bit of a more difficult decision-making process due to the gap in funding that we have, given the need that was expressed to us. We had an initial review of our grant applications by our Illegal Marijuana Market Enforcement Grant Review Committee that occurred just within a few days of the closing of our application. And the review committee, what they had proposed initially was that all grantees, we had grantees that made requests of varying amounts of months of funding, primarily for personnel. What we've seen historically in this grant is that around 90% of the expenditures that we help support are for personnel, and we understand that that is something that our grantees are very concerned about being able to secure long-term funding for. So we had some grantees that were looking at upwards of 3 to 4 years of funding requests to be able to fund those positions. Some were looking at shorter timelines, but the grant review committee, what they recommended was to trim funding to 36 months, but then also to institute a 33% across the board cut to all grant asks in order to meet that $20 million cap that we have in funding currently. However, the commission was concerned. Our commissioners were concerned primarily with the fact that a 33% across the board cut to all grant programs may not be a very equitable way to make sure that we're meeting our program priorities. And so they returned those applications to staff to provide us a little bit of additional time to give the commission a couple options on how best to ensure that we're meeting those program priorities. As I mentioned, next Wednesday, that's when we're planning on having those approvals put, or those suggestions put before the commission for approval. But then also in the meantime, for any of our pre-existing grantees, we've reached out to them to offer flexibility with their current funding. We've offered everything from moving up their progress payments to even we have our current grant funding that we know that we've awarded in the first round back after long session, but we've offered to them if they would like to basically pay them all of their money up front for those programs that they have that they were approved for back in 2021. So one thing that I was asked to include on this presentation was a discussion of the different data points that we require our grantees to provide for us. So we have a number of data points that we've required since the beginning of the grant process. So those are the ones that you'll see on the left-hand side of the slide, which we will continue to require for any new grantees that come in under this next award process that we're about to wrap up. But then we also have our future data points that we intend to also roll out to all of our grantees. And so what we're primarily looking for are any measurements of success or measurements of progress that are being made with our grant funds. And so that can be looking at different felony arrests, whether those are made for marijuana crimes directly or for crimes that have a marijuana cultivation nexus. We also requested our grantees try to provide us with information on how some of these other crimes that folks are charged with, how they are connected to the cultivation, distribution of this illegal marijuana. We also receive a lot of information on the assets and property seized. That can include how many cannabis plants have been seized and destroyed, weapons, vehicles, cash, and that type of information. We then request information on felony indictments and convictions, along with case information that will allow us to tie that into our other data sources to try to analyze the progress that's being made. And then, of course, information on grant-supported trainings. And then also our grantees are asked to actually define what success would look like for them. And so we ask them to provide information on the progress they're making toward achieving the goals that they set for themselves. Some future information that we are still working on finalizing exactly the types of questions we'll ask or what the data points will look like, but I have some general ideas on what the thrust of the information is we're looking for. We know that there's a lot of confusion out there, and indeed there's a lot of confusion even internally here at the Commission as to the relationship between federal and state prosecutions or federal and state interdiction for these types of operations. And so we're going to be requesting information on that and on how those cases are routed into the system so that we can adequately track the progress that's being made. We would like to arrive at some type of information on location as far as where these busts are being made, so that we can track where farms are being basically where the intervention is happening, but then also so we can track to see where farms are popping back up again in the future. The number of incidents where human trafficking and or worker abuse is occurring, but then also hopefully some measurement of the number of trafficked or abused workers. The number of victims served, or what are the resources that are being provided to those victims by our different CBOs, and then also our law enforcement grantees. Instances of environmental damages and denigration, descriptions of those damages so we can track that there, but then also involvement of our other sister agencies so that we can try to help contribute to this discussion as to how the state can better coordinate across different agencies and ensure that the services and resources that we're providing both are not redundant, but then also are actually building upon one another. So my final slide was just a couple notes on what we at the Commission see as important for the program as we move into the future. Certainly one that Chair Marsh identified at the very beginning of the meeting, so I don't have to talk about very much, is the need for both sustainable and sufficient funding. As we saw from our initial grant applications that we received from our counties, the need was much greater than the amount of funding that we had available. As I mentioned before, the vast majority of our funding goes towards positions, and so ensuring that we have consistent funding so that law enforcement can hire, train, and then retain the folks that they have trained up for these positions is just absolutely essential. We know that at this point, we are slated to go back to a $6 million grant as far as the next biennium is concerned, unless legislation is enacted to try to increase those funds. And so one of the greatest fears that I have in my position is that a lot of the hiring or personnel that are brought on board with the $20 million that have been invested currently will not be able to be sustained. Those positions will not be able to just be taken on by our local agencies and continue to be funded. Then the other thing that we continue to struggle with is measurement and success. I described the data points that we would like to have, and while our grantees do an amazing job of reporting the information that we require of them, one of the most vexing issues that we have faced since the beginning is, and we continue to face, is that we don't really know the true scope of the problem. We know that it is very, very bad. We know that there are things that need to happen, but it's difficult to measure the amount of success we're having when we don't know the exact scope of what is out there in the field. And so that's something we're trying to work with both our different agency partners with our grantees, any way that we can try to make sure that we're actually making progress. That is something that we're looking to try to do. And so those are the slides that I have presented. I'll stop sharing my screen so that I can see if folks are getting in the queue to ask questions, but I'd be happy to take any questions that folks have.
Thank you. Director Sanchez. That was a over. Oops, I'm getting it. Is anybody else here?
I think I see Sheriff Sickler's hand up.
Yeah, I just want to make sure our audio is corrected. Okay, sounds good now. Anyway, first overview of where we've been, considerations that need to be folded into any request for additional funding, and the considerations around leaving programs hanging without additional funding. So Sheriff Sickler.
Yeah, hi everybody. I just wanted to thanks Ken for that presentation. That helped explain a few questions I had, but I guess more of a comment, and I'm very happy to be a part of this committee. But one thing is, we passed emergency funding in December, and it's going to be July before any law enforcement sees that. And going to an emergency session with an emergency because relief is needed, we're still 12 months out potentially from personnel additions to these departments. And I just think that, I can't answer because I don't know all the reasons for our community members who worked very hard, and our representatives and our state senator. So thank you, Representative Marsh and Senator Golden, for your work on this issue. But I think there's a hang up somewhere, and I think it would be nice for this committee to know what was really the delays. And I know Ken touched on those a little bit with maybe some of the rules around the money and having to redo the applications. But I just think the community needs assistance, and law enforcement is the big key to that. And it's just disappointing that it's taken 7 months to get this funding to the agencies that need it.
Director, you did address some of the obstacles in your presentation, but do you want to highlight any of those or respond further?
Sure. Thank you, Chair Marsh. This is something to where I think that there have been some moments through this process, that I'll take responsibility for being a bit optimistic about the speed at which that we could move through this. And I think that a bit optimistic as to the rulemaking process. But as I mentioned, the primary issue that we ran into was simply because we continued to tinker with the program. It made it difficult for us to make those awards and to ensure that we didn't pull the rug out from under folks partway through. And there's also a lot that I have learned about even the process by which we get funding at our agency. We did not actually have dollars at our agency as it went through the vast bureaucratic process within state government until April. And so we could not have even cut a check until April. And none of those things are comforting to your citizens, or none of those things make anybody feel any better. They're the unfortunate realities that we have right now. And so I think that when you say that there's something that's not working quite right, there is, and we certainly are not trying to externalize those from the commission. We have tried to move as quickly as possible wherever we can. And we certainly apologize to folks who see this as an issue that has been not taken care of correctly. We are trying to do everything we can at the moment. Like I said, we've also extended that flexibility to our current grantees. I know that we've reached out to Jackson County directly, and we'll do whatever we can to make up for that. But then too, I know that my staff, we've been working as quickly as we possibly can within the rules and within the advice that we receive to make sure we actually do this correctly.
Thank you. And again, I wasn't trying to lay blame at the CJC, your staff, and you have been very helpful. I just think there's a disconnect as well between December and April when the money was awarded to even your organization.
I completely agree there.
Representative Morgan.
Thank you, Chair Marsh and Director Sanchagrin.
Perfect.
Right. Awesome.
Yes.
So I remember a conversation we had with you, and kind of just going through the emergency session and some of this, the upcoming after that was with Jackson and Josephine County having had declared emergencies last year. The intent of the governor's office, the intent of the legislator was to get those emergency declarations funded, and then also provide funding for those other places in the state that were having to deal with this. As far as those emergency asks, we know the money hasn't been allocated or determined yet, correct? That's not public. The commission hasn't voted on that. But is that consideration of those emergency declarations of those two counties still being considered?
Chair Marsh, Vice Chair Morgan, those emergency declarations are certainly a piece to the consideration. And I think that is one thing that the commission is, when I mentioned that we want to make sure that the money is equitably distributed, that is one of the things that I'm mentioning. Our chair of our commission directly told us as staff that we needed to focus funding in the areas that need it most. And as I see how we define or how we prioritize where it's needed most, the emergency declaration plays a role in that. But then also, I think above and beyond, we recognize, whether it's in our grant review committee or within the staff of the commission, that Jackson and Josephine County have an extremely serious issue and therefore do need to be prioritized. And so that's one piece that we're working on, and making sure that sufficient funding makes it down to both of your counties.
But Director, just to clarify, the act of declaring an emergency doesn't qualify you in and of itself for any money.
Well, that's correct. We still have to operate within the program priorities that are set legislatively and by the commission itself. However, I think that everybody who is actually doing the decision making recognizes the challenges that are faced, and so I think that we know that that's where the need is greatest.
Thank you, Steve Marks.
Thanks. For the record, Steve Marks, LLCC, just in case we need to do that for the record. Yeah, the Representative Morgan, having been on Ken's advisory committee when they looked at it, I know I had those things in mind as we looked at priorities, and I think we had discussions, and that group well knew where the need was in the state and the intentions there. So I think at least the advice the full commission got reflected understanding of the emergency in the South. I do want to say it was Sheriff Sickler that, you know, the timing is very concerning. We've always had a problem with these kind of grants that are funding needed personnel activities and the grant funding cycle of the state. And I just want to note this as we look at adding future funds and making this program continue over a stretch of, you know, further time. That we got to take care of that funding cycle issue somewhat. So there's continuity here as the legislature acts. It's debilitating when things get interrupted in the middle of working through the hiring of personnel you expect to have on for some amount of time, and you can't run a program like that very effectively. So it's a little bit of an addition to the emergency and waiting. But once you you need to have that continuity working with the grant process.
I would agree. I think the blip that we've had here really just reemphasizes the importance of understanding where and when funding is going to come in the future, so that when we do get these programs set up, that we don't see big gaps there. Sheriff Sickler, your hand is up. Is that a residue of the old comment, or do you have another comment? Oh, it's gone
No,
now.
I lowered it. I'm sorry about that.
Okay, no problem. Director, thank you. First of all, thank you for that overview. Again, if you were in our meeting earlier, you probably heard us mention that funding for this program is one of the assignments that we have to this task force, looking at both how much is going to be needed and where it should come from, when it should be allocated. Again, to make sure that we don't have gaps and that we keep programs robust as intended. Do you have any preliminary, and recognizing it would be very preliminary, thoughts about how to support this program in the future from what you're seeing in the applications that you've received?
Oh, Chair Marsh, that's a very good question. I think that I don't have any preliminary thoughts today, but I think that based on what you were, I was here earlier, and so yes, I know that continuing funding is a very important thing that this group is working on. And what I was going to offer up is that we do have all of these applications that we would be happy to distill down for the members of either that subcommittee or this full committee to provide some insight into what that continued and sustained funding would need to look like. As I mentioned, some of our grantees had very long timetables, and so I think that they would, if we were able to boost funding into our regular biennial chunks, but we knew that it was continued guaranteed funding going forward, then some of the asks that were provided by our grantees would probably be a bit smaller. And so I think that that is some information that we can provide. We can try to do some financial work to be able to provide this group with, what is the answer to the $1 million question, which is what is the amount of money that we need to invest in the future going forward. And so that's help what we can provide. And maybe that is the one bit of information I think we can glean from those applications, is that right now, a lot of our grantees are thinking about what if this is the only time, the only crack, that we have at getting a large amount of funding. And if we're able to solve that issue, then perhaps even $20 million, maybe we wouldn't have this type of gap. We'd be able to spread it around the state for the amount of grantees that we have and the needs that need this there. And so we can help to try to dial in on what that funding amount would be.
Great. And I think I'm going to speak for the group and say we would really appreciate your help on that. But you also touched on something that was another question that was prompted during your presentation, which is I have assumed, from my point of view, that the legislature would refund this program and that the money, the $20 million needed to last for maybe a year and a half, 2 years. But it sounds like you got applications for people looking far into the future. So did that vary dramatically among the applicants? And if so, how did you deal with them?
It did vary pretty substantially among the applicants. We had some applicants who were looking for merely a year or perhaps 2 years of funding. Again, we had some that were going out to multiple 3-4 years, and I think that that's one of the reasons why the initial recommendation that was provided to the commission for just a straight cap on the amount of funding and then a cut was there was pause that was taken there to ensure that we were not harming, for example, a grantee that was looking for a very small amount, even like $500,000, but for a year of funding compared to some that were looking for longer term funding. And so that's what we have really delved into recently. But I would also say that when we look at those timelines, one thing that we've told to our grantees, and that I don't have a problem repeating here, is that while we may be making some recommendations at the commission to say, well, we will cap a grant at 36 months, we still want to ensure that our local grantees have enough flexibility within their grant that even if we quote unquote cap it at 36 months for 5 positions, for example, that if our local grantee wants to elect to only have 4 positions, but then extend that out a little bit farther, then we are willing to give them that flexibility to do so. And so some of the discussion about capping is more of a mental exercise for us to get to an amount of funding as opposed to a directive, because we don't want to provide those directives because we know that our grantees know what they need on the ground. But we did get a lot of different requests, but we also want to try to fulfill those requests as best as possible, because we know that even when we go through the process each biennium and we do have what we think of as guaranteed funding built into CSL, I understand that a lot of our grantees have concerns and they're worried that depending on how the legislative process goes forward, that funding could end. And so I think that's why a lot of them are continuing to look forward and say, you know what, I'll try to take a big chunk now and I'll try to stretch it into the future as far as possible, because there is still that uncertainty that our grantees have. Even if I feel confident as an agency director that it's built into my base budget and it's something that's going to happen, I know our grantees do not always feel the same way, even if we try to provide that kind of comforting confidence to them. And so again, we try to meet those grantees where they are. And so if that's what they believe that they need, as long as they're able to meet the other priorities and to provide the information that we need, then that's what we want to try to provide for them.
Thank you. That's super helpful. Tyler. Tyler, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, there's a little bit of delay there. How am I now?
You're good.
Thank you, Chair Marsh. And I just wanted to speak really quick to the idea of determining need as we go forward, kind of the intersection of the criminal justice grant and this committee. It seems to me that grants are probably going to be awarded based on a demonstrated need from grantees who had awards in the past. But as you move forward, identifying the need really is going to be dependent on knowing what we don't know. For instance, when you report statistics in Oregon when it comes to drugs, you could report it, or drug seizures, you could report it to 3, 4, 5 different entities, and deconflicting that to being able to see the true need is probably going to be important, a topic for us to talk about, a topic for the Criminal Justice Commission. An example I think that would be important to know is that the state police, we work in all of these counties, but we don't necessarily report to the Criminal Justice Commission. So our work in counties that are unfunded by this program wouldn't be taken into account as you look at the future need. I know there is one place in Oregon to report forfeitures, for instance. We report them to the Criminal Justice Commission, but there's no single clearinghouse for marijuana seizures in Oregon. things might get double reported depending on which data center it's going to. And so just food for thought there, and talking about a need. I guess what I'm saying to sum it up is you might not know the need in Lynn or Marion counties because they won't have reported it to the Criminal Justice Commission.
I would completely agree there. My background is in data science, and so the shortcomings of our data and our knowledge, and also the redundancies in that knowledge or in that data, is something that it's very apparent, and it's something I have been working with Director Marks and OLCC. We've been trying as agencies to come together to formulate plans to better first identify what those gaps are, maybe identify the redundancies, but how can we better share and break down the silos between agencies? Because you're exactly right. One of the reasons why we don't know what's going on across the state partially is it's hard. It's hard to figure out where these grows are and to have our finger on that pulse at all time. But another part is just the inefficiencies that we have between agencies and within state government that we can overcome if we work at it. And so that's something that certainly we're committed to, and we want to ensure that we can do that as best as possible, because we can't measure success, and we won't know if we're making any headway if we can't do that.
It's a great comment. And Senator Przansky, what I'm thinking is that would be a good topic for your subcommittee to look at, is data and coordinating the data so that we can actually measure both the problem and progress on the problem.
I'll be relying on my lifeline of Amanda, making sure that is field notes into my subcommittee. But yes, we'll be glad to take it with the reminder.
Great, thank you. Sheriff Sickler.
Yeah, I didn't know if it'd be helpful, as probably I think I'm maybe one of the only grant requesters in the room as far as an agency. But a lot of the thought process going into the grant requests and is, the long-term sustainability. It's not just the sheriffs making the decisions. We work with our county government, and there are rules around hiring and sustained funding, and a lot of challenges where, we've gotten a lot of positive, affirmations about, funding coming, and it'll be there and it'll be sustained. But sometimes county government rules won't allow you to hire on that until they actually see the funding. And, our thought process was, we know we have a problem, obviously, and we know that problem is going to continue for some time, and trying to stretch out resources for the 36 or 42 months that we put in our grant seemed more reasonable based on the information we have currently, meaning, this is the funding that we got. We have no guarantees it'll come. And now everyone has, said, hey, this is a goal. But unfortunately, like I said, that until that money is allocated, our county governments, and I'm reluctant from a hiring process, because if I hire 20 people, which would be a good need, we've requested, I think, even more than that, and then have to lay people off, that's a pretty damaging thing to an organization and to a county and to the ability to hire and recruit people for long term. So there's a lot of things that go into these grant requests. And so as we move forward as a committee, I'm really happy to have these conversations and be a part of seeing how we can develop long-term funding, even if it's smaller amounts, as Ken said, but over longer time. I think that's going to be the most beneficial to stamping out and eradicating this illegal marijuana market long-term.
Thank you, Sheriff. I think there was, I do want to note, during the short session, there was a valiant, I'll call it a valiant effort made to try to identify the next round of funding. And I would thank Director Sandringham as well as Steve Marks for really helping us brainstorm around that. In the end, I think, frankly, my frank assessment is that the allocation made during the special session took some of the pressure off finding a long-term answer. But what that really means is that now this group needs to find the long-term answer and bring it to 2023. Brent Kenyon.
Thanks, Chair Marsh. I just wanted to add, I think the importance of the timeline seasonally. I think Sheriff Sickler and Josephine County Sheriff have done an amazing job with the resources available to them, kind of waiting on money. But we have, they had a significant amount of wins on the illegal side this year. That's going to be, carried on into the future, where this money is super important to get timely to these places, because once the harvest happens and the product is moved, it becomes a cat and mouse game of trying to find where the stored product is prior to it leaving the state or going where it's going. So moving forward, just even legislatively, I think Senator Przansky, just to be on the radar that whatever we can do, once the grants are in place, great. But, time-wise moving forward, I think there needs to be something done where when the flag is raised by Jackson County or other counties that are interested, how quick we respond to that. I mean, at the point, we really could have used the National Guard to come in with the scale of the grows that were down here. I think you and Steve Marks and several came down and we saw, what the actual scope was of what's out there, and it's pretty wild what actually got through, and encourage those folks to move forward and continue the behavior. But also where we hear, on the ground stories of a lot of folks that are getting more savvy about how they're doing it, spreading out their grows, not doing 100 greenhouses at one site. This year, they're going to be doing 20 or 30 on 10 different sites, and they cover any fines that are out. I know there's a lot of offers out there to property owners to pay any fines that they face as far as being challenged with allowing them to grow on the same properties. So there's a lot, kind of things are definitely shifting on the ground. We see a lot of inactivity, which is good. We see a lot of empty greenhouses, thanks to the efforts of law enforcement. But just how fast we react financially with that. I know there's challenges on getting the money in, but so important for them to be able to act on the ground when the time is right prior to harvest, obviously.
So thank you, Brent. And you're verging into the next topic on our agenda, which is good. But before we move there, I don't see any other questions for Ken. So Director, thank you so much for being here. I think that was a terrific overview for us on the whole funding question. We're definitely going to take you up for any analysis that you can provide to us as we try to assess what is it that we really need to keep this program sustained over time, and what's a reasonable legislative ask. And then beyond that, there is a question of where that money comes from. That is probably outside what you care about. You're handing out the money wherever it comes in. But if you have any thoughts about that as well, we will welcome them as the conversation goes on.
Thank you, Rep. Marsh. I see, Rep. Morgan has her hand
up.
Oh,
Rep. Morgan, I see your hand.
Sorry about that. One other topic before Director leaves. One of the things that we found in the funding need down here wasn't just strictly for sheriff law enforcement. I mean, this started out of the additional crimes that were related to what was going on with the drug trafficking organizations. But we also found, and we've had people locally say, well, why don't you just give more money to the sheriff's office? You don't need code enforcement. You don't need these other things. But what we found is that the whole picture funding at the local county level was more than just sheriff's office. And our sheriff's office in both jurisdictions work with multiple agencies locally. But also, when you have electrical outlets, when you have water contamination, we haven't even talked about DEQ impacts or code enforcement and all that. And the grants after the emergency session were supposed to open up to cover that as well. And our sheriffs are trying to incorporate a full ask on behalf of the whole local governments, even though it's the counties getting the money. I just want to throw that out there for the group to understand that this is more than just purely handcuffs. There's the life safety issues. There's these other impacts in the communities that also were supposed to be addressed.
And do you have any comments on that?
I would just say, I think that's an amazing comment. That's exactly what we're seeing in our applications. And when we share those applications or the pieces with you, I think that'll be great information for this committee too. Yes, lots of code enforcement. I mean, it's a consortium within the county that's being sheriff led. But I think that Rep. Morgan, I couldn't say it any better, but I think that we are more than happy to share all of that information with you so that you all can have a good idea of what that need is. And yes, it's not just a law enforcement need.
And so, to be clear, there have been no barriers in the funding stream around those other kinds of activities.
Certainly not. The only barrier is, again, trying to make sure that we can fit the funding request into the funding available. But no, we are including all of those as a package, yes, within the county.
Right. Okay, I don't see any more hands. So again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for the follow-up. We're going to drop on your expertise to the possible largest extent that we can.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Director. Okay, with that, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. And we listed this as updates from the field. And I expect this to be a regular report on our agendas. We know that as we do this work, we are also moving through another season out there on the ground. We know that, as Brent alluded to, practices may change, the way that the problem presents itself may be different. We're also interested in just any kind of assessment of how bad it is. Are we seeing the same thing we saw last year? So this will be a regular opportunity for those of you who are really engaged in this to update all of us to make sure that as we move forward, that our work is really reflecting what the need is out there where the incidents are happening. And we'll probably specifically queue one or more of you up for each one of these meetings. But I would also hope, as time allows, to the extent time allows, if this is an opportunity for anybody who has a contemporary observation to be able to share it with the rest of us, just to keep us informed and make sure our work is relevant. So Sheriff Sickler, I think you're up today. We asked you down in Jackson County to give us your observations.
Okay, so I will say that I am happy that this year does not quite look like last year right now. So that is good. And I attribute that to a few things, and I'd love to take credit for law enforcement, but I think it's a combined effort between our regulatory agencies. I think it's work done by our legislators to help change laws that created these loopholes that made it very easy for the nefarious behaviors and the breaking of the law. And so I think there's some other things. I think the water issues created some less of the cannabis farms, so to speak. People were nervous how they get water. So I just think the awareness created and all the work done did have an impact. Now, with that being said, are we done? No, we're not near done. There's still more work than I think we can ever get to, honestly, at least right now in our current operations and staffing models. To give you an example, last year, I believe we had about 500 locations that we had complaints on that we didn't get to. So that's a pretty significant number, and that's just what we had complaints on, and there's still plenty that weren't complained on either. So there's that. But the large, huge hoop house sites that we saw go in last year, early, like say March and April, don't seem to be prevalent like they were. We have heard things from the law enforcement side about the tactics changing or the methods changing on how the grows are going to be constructed in smaller plots, and so that's a good thing in one area, but it also can create some more tedious work. So for instance, if you have one big area that needs to be eradicated or a search warrant served, that's one search warrant, that's one affidavit, so to speak, for that location. But if you start having an individual who puts multiple sites up, then it requires all that paperwork and all that administrative work to be done for all of those sites, which is quite time consuming and very tedious work. So it changes the scope. You might not have to pull 50 hoop houses worth of product out at once, but you may be spending an extra week or two on just paperwork to get to some of these houses, and then you have to create operation plans. So the work changes, and so it may look a little less intimidating, but in actuality, it's probably a little bit more so because it's all the different locations. I think the market got super saturated last year, and Brent could probably comment on this differently. So I think that's probably deterred some, and I think we're going to see a very cyclic attempts to flood the markets. So maybe next year we see another increase, or maybe it's 2 years we see another push, and we're kind of hearing those things. So, but overall, we're very pleased that we don't have the same look, and I think it's going to help our community, and I think it's going to help our county see that some of these things aren't as in your face as they were last year. So some of the other byproducts, so the environmental impacts, we have huge grow sites from last year that are basically abandoned with, yards and yards, and I'm understating this a lot, but of trash, debris, plastics, potting materials, just chemicals, everything all over these sites just left. And so it's going to be a substantial cleanup effort for whomever, property owners or, environmental protection type agencies in the future, or whatever needs to happen. So that's a challenge moving forward, and how we deal with that and where that work might be done. And again, that's going to be a code enforcement push to start, going to the landowners and requiring them to clean up. So as stated, that those entities also need some assistance with funding and staffing, so that work can be done and get done right, so those long-term impacts hopefully aren't there for those plots of land. But overall, our team is still busy. I think we did 3 or 4 operations, say search warrants, in the last week and a half. So they still are very active, even though we're not even into the harvest season. And as I think Kent said, they're still finding places where there's money or there's product and there's things being shipped out of the area that we're investigating daily. So a lot of work to be done.
Thank you, Sheriff. Any questions for Sheriff Sickler on what he's seeing? Lily, or Rep Morgan, sorry.
It's okay. When we're out of the Capitol, I go by Lily. I am also hearing, Sheriff, and I'm wondering if you're seeing this. I mean, not just with solid waste agencies having to pay the bill, if the property owner doesn't, but grow sites not just spreading out, but I'm hearing a lot of complaints from neighbors that they're moving them indoors. A lot of structures going up, they're hiding them entirely, not just doing hoop houses. Are you seeing that in Jackson County as well?
I think there are some of that. I don't have. I have not seen it personally, just because I don't go out, and I haven't had a chance to talk to our detectives specifically about that. Again, we're still following up on a lot of complaints from last year, so we'll see how things evolve during this grow season. I'm sure we will get those, and we have had them. We've had indoor large grows and warehouses and things like that. And I can just tell you from my experience, I know that Sheriff Daniel has told me they're seeing some of that in their county for sure. But to give you a number on how much of that is taking place, I can't at this point.
Tyler, question.
Sorry, my mute has quite a bit of a delay there. And Chair Marsh, I don't know if I was going to get an opportunity to comment from the perspective of the Oregon State Police, but I just kind of wanted to echo Representative Morgan's topic of the grows, kind of diversifying and moving indoors, and just point out that we really have 2 different animals in this state. We have Southern Oregon outdoor grows. There's a few visible outdoor grows through the Willamette Valley, but then as you get farther north, they're all indoor. And the challenges we face are like Sheriff Sickler brought up. We're looking at multiple affidavits for the same organization. So we're looking at organizations that have between 5 and 25 different locations. It becomes a different labor intensity. When I go down and join Sheriff Sickler's officers, or down in Josephine County, we'll need a few hundred people to tackle up to 60 acres worth of plants. When they come up and help me out, we'll need a few hundred officers to serve at 20 locations at once. So it's just we're dealing with completely different animals, obviously more visible down there. And that's just a comment, just kind of echoing both the sheriff and Representative Morgan's comments. And then I was going to, if I get an opportunity, kind of give an overview of the makeup of the state police and our teams and what we're seeing.
Sure. What do you want to just offer that view from the ground right now?
Who, me?
No, well, I'm sorry, Tyler, did you say you wanted to
Yes, yeah, just to to put that out there for the community and the public watching. Kind of the makeup of our teams. We have a Southwest region and a Northwest region marijuana team. We're overseen by a lieutenant down out of our Central Point office. In the Southern region, we have 5 marijuana detectives and 1 marijuana sergeant. And then in the north half of the state, we currently have 2 marijuana detectives that handle from Eugene north, and then myself as the marijuana sergeant. I do spend a good portion of my time supervising drug detectives that work on at county level task forces that don't necessarily have marijuana as their priority. For the Northwest region team, we also have a 3rd detective identified. When we are speaking of funding, whether it be on the Criminal Justice Commission grants or just finding more investigators for these cases, I think it's important for everybody to realize that I was given that 3rd position that I will fill next month almost a year ago. Immediately after identifying that 3rd detective, 1 detective promoted out. Then there's, getting room to take out of somewhere else in the agency. So just that lag time of 12 months to put somebody on the street, and then you got to train them to a different style of police work. So I think it's just important for everyone to realize. I also thought I'd share kind of some year-over-year statistics from our annual reports that I think would be important. In 2020 versus 2021, we handled 265 cases in 2020 and 311 cases in 2021. Sheriff Sickler pointed out that they had 500 complaints that were unassigned or unworked. And we also have a huge amount of unworked complaints. And in fact, we almost don't have enough time to log all the complaints. I mean, it's kind of like, please tell us how much, please use time you don't have to tell us how much you couldn't do. It's kind of where we're stuck. We have 1 administrative staff for the drug enforcement section. She handles 25 plus detectives, all of our forfeiture reporting, all of our training. So there's not really a great administrative way to collect that information. But back to those numbers, one of the things that we're most proud of is the amount of guns we take. In 2020, we took 150 guns, and in 2021, we took 115 guns. And really, when we're looking at the will of the voters, we're looking at the public safety aspect. We're looking at violent crimes associated with marijuana. And so that's a number that we're really proud of. But when it comes to bulk plants and to bulk pounds, I think I've got some staggering numbers for you. From 2020 to 2021, we were up 905% in our seizure of plants. And as far as poundage goes, we were up anywhere from 385% to 975%. And that's a huge range. I understand that. But it's important to note that there's 1 case that jumped between years. So depending on when I report it, I can skew the numbers really quick. But that was a seizure of 109,000 plants that was part of a federal case. So it's not getting any better this year, and we're working as fast as we can, tackling as many cases as we can. We are seeing a huge decrease in the amount of registered hemp sites, and I think that in the long run, that'll be good for a lot of our outdoor operations.
Thank you, Sergeant. And I think those numbers will be helpful, especially as you start to accumulate data for this year, so that we can, again, on the reports from the ground, understand how the industry is moving as we do this work. So thank you for that background. Jake, did you want to make any comments from the water perspective? Do you have any,
yeah, Chair.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Chair Marsh and Vice Chair Morgan. I talked to the water masters of the Southwest region specifically about this question. It's echoing a lot of what Sheriff Sickler and Tyler Bechtel from OSP are mentioning here. a diversification of the sites. So far less large scale sites, more sites less than 5 acres, maybe 3 to 5 greenhouses, where one outfit might have had 20 or 30 greenhouses on one site. Now it's spread across several sites. So we'll find the same names kind of aligned with some of those sites in our investigations. Some of the things that we're seeing as a result of the increased staff that came from 5561, we're able to respond more timely now. We have 3 out of the 6 hired so far in the Southwest. Those are the cannabis specific or cannabis focused assistant water masters. So we've been able to do a better job of coordinating with the sheriff's office, the regional drug teams, and then also OLCC and ODA when they bring something to our, awareness and they're kind of concerned maybe there's a water nexus there. We've been able to get out more timely on that. The presence of these staff has been noticed and mentioned by both law enforcement and code enforcement in these counties, but also in the registered and legal cannabis industry. They've actually been appreciative and supportive of these folks going out with an education and enforcement, dual duty there to go out and let folks know what water law is and how to be in compliance with it. And when we do observe things that aren't in compliance, to address them as such. I think Sheriff Stickler pointed out how there's a lot of variables at play, why things look different this year in a way. And I think a lot of those have already been mentioned, so I won't reiterate. The only thing I would add, though, since I'm the water guy, we are looking at a drought year here again. We had a great little bump of precip here in the last 30 days. And so I noticed on my way to work this morning, a lot of fields that hadn't been worked yet are now starting to get worked, and that's not specific to one crop type. So we may see some of these larger growths start to build back up in the next month or so, just because things dry out and you get to work your fields. I will say in our experience, the larger sites, both registered and unregistered, a lot of them were within irrigation district boundaries because you have a more reliable delivery of water. However, the irrigation districts in the Southwest due to drought are having a limited delivery season this year. And so, we're seeing some of those sites aren't really ramping up, and that could be because of every variable we've all laid out here. But again, we're seeing the garbage Sheriff Stickler pointed out on sites that were just kind of abandoned and left, leasey type sites. But that's about probably it for what we're seeing. I will say from the notice of violation process, which is our way of addressing it via a final order administrative process, violations of water law. At this point, I don't have the exact number, but I believe we've issued more this year than we did last year up to this date. And again, I think that's a direct result of this dedicated staff that's going out and addressing these issues. So we're thankful for those resources. And we are in the process of staffing up, I believe, 4 more bodies in the Northwest region. We finished that recruitment, and we're just trying to get those things aligned through the human resource channels. So ramping up, it's helpful. We did have, along with the common theme here, we had plenty of complaints we were not able to make meaningful progress on last year. We're hopeful that that won't be the case this year with this increase in staffing. And open to any questions.
Great, thank you very much. Amanda, did we have anybody else? Had we queued up anybody else to give a report from the field today?
You mentioned Josh Eastman might want to have a report for what he's seen.
Josh, any comments?
So I would concur with everything that they're smaller. Our team is still doing 1 or 2 or more a week. During the off season, we were trying something different to get the indoor grows. And so they're not only warehouses, there's actually, the most recent one I remember is actually a $750,000 house where they had gutted the entire thing and turned it into, and the way we find them is because they are requesting 400 amp service through the county, and then so those end up being fire hazards, etc. So fingers crossed that the big ones are diversified, but as Sheriff Stickler and Sergeant Bechtel said, that leads to more paperwork, more search warrants, more teams, and actually probably even more people. The crimes associated with it aren't really down. I can think of a recent robbery in the 1st degree from a grow. Sort of an interesting, that one case sort of it's still pending, so I can't discuss the details, but it kind of encapsulates this whole problem all in one nice little file that I have. So yeah, it's kind of the same, but at least they're smaller, and rumor has it that maybe some of the bigger DTOs have, based on what Jackson County and we did, that their bottom line was taking too much of a hit. So they're trying some other states potentially for the large ones, what I've heard. So
thank you. Well, we are accumulating a lot of experience that could be relevant to those other states.
Yes.
And we're going to wind up this section of the agenda, but I think, Sheriff, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to, if you're interested really quickly in stats from the last 3 years between Josephine and Jackson County, and I'll just throw out the rough numbers combined because our problems are very similar. About 637 guns, about 1.5 million plants destroyed, about 4.1 million pounds, and about 123,000 pounds of processed product destroyed or seized, and about $10 million in cash. So pretty busy down here.
Right. And Brent, you had a quick comment? Brent, you're muted.
Sorry, just a couple things I wanted to add to that. I think recognizing that we saw a trend and almost that I've noticed now that's kind of a biannual overproduction, and then this year will be a little bit lighter of production because the amount of money that's out there, and just to give reference, like actual money reference, cannabis, even a year ago was $700 to $1,000 for an outdoor pound. We see people selling them at $50, $100 a pound now because they've grown so much. It's just that, that's what happens when overproduction comes in. So a lot of people are less interested to grow a lot of cannabis this year, which may not necessarily reflect next year. What we'll have is what I'm predicting is going to be a good year for the legal system, which somewhat relates to the illegal system, where we're going to see an increase in value, and which may get people interested a little bit more. What we saw with hemp was a lot of growers left the illegal system and even the legal system to go what they thought was going to be a tremendous amount of money in the hemp space. I think initially actually planning on growing hemp, not necessarily focusing on D8 or anything to that effect. That was kind of a fallout of everyone growing hemp and no one being able to make hemp, so they started figuring out how to monetize it. So this kind of biannual thing when it comes to money, but I think the pricing and then indoor is obviously priority when it comes to purchasing the legal and the black market system. Has always been. Indoor was moved in the 70s to hide somewhere to be able to continue to grow. So that trend isn't new. I would say paying attention back then, I know there was a lot more involvement from energy companies paying attention to abnormal usage of power in facilities that haven't seen that kind of increase. So I'd encourage, maybe some communication between law enforcement and energy providers to keep an eye on that. Water usage isn't the only, resource here. Indoor specifically, power is going to be a real sign of where there's been none being used, and like Josh mentioned, in a house that was a residential house, I can imagine the power bill was quite high for a large operation like that. It probably doesn't make sense for a party of 5 living in a house. So I think there's just some financial trends that we have to watch to kind of see what's happening. We're by far not over the hump. As Sheriff Sickler said, we definitely have moved in and started tackling things that really matter. Getting that water under control is, if you can't get water on a site, it's really going to discourage people from being able to produce a product there. So that's a huge one that's making a difference. But moving forward, I think we can watch some of these trends that I've certainly seen over the years and finding ways to kind of curb it. But by no means, I think there is a bigger shift. I would say there's a bigger shift into getting smarter about how the illegal operations are being hidden than the fact that they're disappearing. I think it's just getting harder. They're going to get harder to find.
Thank you. And Amanda Metzler, I'm going to let you provide the last comment on this topic.
Thank you, Chair Marsh. I'll be very brief. At our Josephine County Cannabis Advisory Panel last week, we had ODA give us an update on the hemp licenses, and I just wanted to share that with the group because I thought that was pretty important. There's only 400 licenses in the entire state that have been applied for thus far. They had a cutoff of May 31st, so there wouldn't be any additional. 170 of them have been issued. The rest are held up with background checks currently. There's only 18 so far licensed in Josephine County and 49 licensed so far in Jackson County. So I thought that that was just important data for all of us to understand where the hemp program numbers are going. And it also will be helpful for the sheriff. They said by the end of June, they'll have a list of the official licenses issued, therefore to be able to check against it. Thank you.
That is really great data. Thank you for sharing it. It shows just a plummeting of that official market, or the individuals in that official market. Okay, well, thank you to all of you who had comments on what's happening on the ground. I think that will be really tracking what you're seeing on a regular basis will be really important to help us all keep us updated and make sure we're taking action that's actually going to be effective over time. So with that, we'll move to some of the more business things that we just need to talk about how this group conducts ourselves. Public comment. We are going to propose that at the end of every meeting that we provide 10 minutes for public comment from anybody who wants to sign up and offer input to the group. Clearly, people can also comment by emailing me or Amanda Borup, and we'll make sure that communiques get distributed to the group as a whole. Is there anybody who has any concerns about having a regular public comment period attached to these meetings? Brent? You're muted.
If we're going to limit the amount of public comment to 10 minutes, I would suggest giving a time limit per person, so we're not, because I think that could easily be taken up by one person's comments.
We'll definitely have to manage it. Point well made, for sure. Rep. Morgan.
Thank you, Chair. I also, I'm wondering if it would be appropriate to limit the comments to agenda items. Or, I mean, and specifically, do you want them in the subcommittees as well as the full committees? Just kind of wondering.
I'm not going to ask subcommittees to manage public comment. I don't know if you'll be able to, I suspect you're not going to be able to accommodate members of the public in that setting. In terms of the breadth of comments, I'd say let's give that a go and see if comments feel like they continue to be relevant to all of us. And then we'll ratchet it down or make it more specific if we're really just getting input that isn't relevant to what's been on the agenda or gets too far reaching. How's that? Any other comments on a public comment on the question of public comment? Great. Then in our next meeting, we will make that part of the regular agenda. And speaking of next meetings, we are proposing that this group as a whole meet monthly. We will take up the big subject matter that we've assigned to the group as a whole, and we'll start picking those items off meeting by meeting by meeting and advancing them at this level. But the subcommittees, in some cases, we think are going to have some really intense work ahead. So I'm going to leave it to the chairs of the subcommittees and the staff that's been assigned to them to start pulling those groups together as soon as you can. And you can meet as often as you want. I am sure on our monthly meetings, we're going to want to hear a quick update from somebody from each subcommittee to tell us what's going on, how the work is moving ahead, what the gaps are, what you need to in order to complete your assignments. So does that meeting schedule sound all right? Basically, big group once a month. I think Amanda has already reached out to check your schedules and is trying to put some days on our calendars. Subcommittees, have at it. As soon as you want to get working, get working. Again, keeping your eye on our timeline, which is, wanting to have some pretty good recommendations by the fall. Okay, Rep. Morgan, I see your hand. Is that a current hand?
It is.
Sure.
Thank you. I was just going to suggest, based on earlier when you mentioned that if anyone wants to participate in a subcommittee, would it be appropriate for them to contact Amanda Borup so she can coordinate those people that we kind of had a generic list out there, but if you want to do more, Amanda would be the right consolidation for that.
Yeah, Amanda has volunteered to taken the volunteers and to parcel them out to the right committee chairs and staff to make sure that people get integrated into the committees. And if you have anybody contact you directly, just let Amanda know so that we can sort of keep an eye on overall how things are functioning and who's assigned where. Okay. Then Amanda, do we have a date for our next meeting set yet?
We do. Our next meeting is set for July. It's Friday, July 15th from 10 to 12. We scheduled out through October, but I'm going to have to go back out again for August and September to try to get some additional dates. So probably next week you'll see another poll from me come out to try to get some availability for those 2 months.
Great. So keep your eye open for an email from Amanda to make her life her scheduling hell as easy as possible. With that, I think we have concluded the business of this meeting. Amanda, is there anything that I missed or that you wanted to make sure that we mentioned?
No, I think you have everything on the agenda.
Okay. Tyler, I see your hand is up. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, just a quick question for Amanda or maybe you, Chair Marsh. Is it possible that we could get notified of other subcommittee meetings that we're not on? I know there's a couple of agenda items that might happen in another committee that I would be able to weigh in on, and I'd just like to know ahead of time that they're meeting.
So Amanda, how do you suggest trying to coordinate that? We've given the committees freedom to set their own schedule and their agendas. Tyler, why don't I just say we'll give that thought and we'll figure out how you can be fully informed. Maybe we'll just put you on the mailing list for all the committees. And if anybody else wants to be on that mailing list too, you can be too.
I think that might be the easiest way. If anybody wants to receive notice about committees, just let me know, and then I'll make sure that the staff of those committees just add you as a copy to anything they send out to their committees.
I think that will wind up being the easiest process here. Anybody else have anything for the good of the order? If not, thank you all for being here. Good. I think I'm starting to feel like we're organized. We know what we're doing. We have some really great people in charge of taking on the hard issues that have been assigned to this committee. And Steve, did you have a final comment? I see your hand.
I did. It's a little bit off topic, but I can't help but to share. We were just at our Cannabis Regulators Association in Olympia, Washington for the past 2 days. Governor Inslee was a keynote, then Lieutenant Governor Heck, and they both really shared the importance of the work. But the one thing, there's sort of this, I don't do politics, I'm an administrator, but there's an expectation that all the cannabis law is going to crash in Congress, and safe banking acts hanging out there. And both of them, particularly former Congressman Heck, really made an impassioned plea for us to go after banking this fall. And, it is a root of a lot of criminality in our system. And it is the access to capital issue. And I was so impressed by their pleas that I just wanted to share that here, because it's maybe something not necessarily on this task force's direct agenda, but certainly there. And just wanted to mention it because it's so important. A lot more to report from that work. We'll do it in the course of the subcommittee and full committee work as it comes up. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Steve. And just to clarify, are they expecting a bill will be in Congress this fall around banking?
No, I think they're expecting that everything, I don't fully understand the process at which it gets revived, but everything's sort of failing out. And then I think everyone's hoping amongst the industry, amongst those concerned about cannabis, that provisions of safe banking can somehow be erected in the fall and break out of sort of the congeal of politics around it. And that if there's a focus on banking, then it may be the one thing that they can potentially get done.
So isolate banking as the target of their efforts. Got it. Okay, well, sounds like a good idea. And Tyler, your hand is up. Was that a residue? Okay. Okay, with that, I think we've conducted the business. Thank you all so much for being here and for the work that you're taking on, and the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.